part of the shame that came along with all of the sexual abuse, because part of the sexual abuse was my mom actually sexually abusing me. And so there was a lot of shame around of how I was seeing women and how I was relating to women. And I didn't understand why I was feeling, certain things. So Melissa and you were able to really meet me in that place of deep despair, where all I wanted was really just to go to sleep and never wake up.
Promiscuity, we need to understand, isn't just a choice to embrace sexual sin. We need to get underneath of the symptom, and don't ignore the symptom, but we need to get underneath the symptom, a number of layers down probably. And so there's so much that plays into why we're acting out in sexually compulsive ways or compulsive sinful ways. And I think we as Christians really do ourselves and others a great disservice when we're not willing to go to those deeper levels with people.
To be able just to tell individuals out there in the audience that have deep, deep trauma that doing the work, Gary, like doing the work is actually where the freedom comes in, and that it's scary and that it's hard. It's so hard, but it is so worth doing the hard work, not alone, but with others.
Hey friends, we are so glad that you've tuned in for another episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast. We are grateful for you to join us to hear Becky, my friend Becky, friend of myself, friend of my wife, friend of Jeremiah, who also works for our ministry. And I'm excited for you to be able to hear some of her story and also just the wisdom that flows out of her in the dialogue that we're going to be having today. And this may be a one-part podcast. It may be something that extends into a second podcast. But I am, again, looking forward to you being able to hear from Becky yourself and to just engage in some of the dialogue that we'll be having today and possibly in a future podcast. So Becky, thank you so much for joining us for today's podcast.
Thank you, Gary. I feel honored to be able to spend time with you to share what the Lord has done in my life. And I'm really grateful for that.
Absolutely. Well, we're glad again that you're here. So one of the things that we do, and those that have been listening or watching our podcast for any length of time know that the first thing we do is ask our guests to share a little bit of their own story, how God met them, what they were wrestling with, struggling with, and maybe one primary theme, or could be multiple things, but just asking them to share some of how God intersected their life and rescued them, and what life looks like on the other side of saying yes to Jesus.
Yes, of course. So Gary, I'm first generation here. My family is from Mexico. And so my mom was the oldest of 6 children. And so she, grandma and grandpa, just very poor in Mexico. So she was the one that kind of took one of the parent roles. So a lot of responsibility. When they came here, my mom, again, was the one that kind of went out, started working, helping the family out. She met my dad, got married, had myself and my sister. But by the time I was born, they had already divorced. And so at that time, it seemed like there was just a lot. My mom was just going through a lot. Now I reflect on it and I just wonder just all that responsibility and just some of the culture stuff around misogyny, how that might have affected her. But by the time, I'm born, her and dad are divorced. And so she starts kind of looking for love in all the wrong places. And so we're kind of, going along for the ride, and she's not able to keep a job. She has, boyfriends in and out. And it started, I think for me, it started about at 5 I have a sense even earlier, just kind of that emptiness, that darkness that was
Mm-hmm.
already happening. And so there was just, yeah, my mom just had us in situations that were not healthy and not helpful. And by five, she had started taking us to visit my dad. And so that's where some of the abuse started happening. And then that kind of
Mm-hmm.
just continued on to specific boyfriends that she had. And so, yeah, throughout from like the age of 5 to I would say about 13, there was, sexual abuse. I experienced, rape and trafficking. And a lot of times I don't recall some of those memories just because there was also like substance involved in the abuse. And and so this was kind of this ongoing. And so whatever it seemed like, whatever the intention that the Lord had for my life, it was just stripped away little by little by little by little by
Mm-hmm.
little. And by 13, there was nothing internally, like it was just kind of the shell, right? I'm looking to others to tell me who I am because I have no idea who I am. My value comes from
Right.
what I can do and offer sexually to others. And the only thing I think, Gary, that kept me going during that time is the fact that my grandmother was a home base in a sense. And so grandma was Catholic, and she was devoted to praying. And so when my sister and I would come to live with her, she always had the Bible out. She was always praying. She was always interceding. And
Mm.
so I think she was, not that I think, I know she was the first representation of Jesus in my life. Super broken, grandma's super broken, right? But she was like just enough of a taste of who Jesus
Mm-hmm.
was that somehow I was able to kind of keep going. And so yeah, I at 13, um I'm back living with my grandmother. By 15, my mom's diagnosed with breast cancer. Her lifestyle wasn't really much any different. She was caught up in alcoholism and drugs, and by 16, she died. She died of breast cancer,
Mm.
and basically she left. It feels like she left all of that darkness, all of that sin, and all of that brokenness. It's kind of like she just said, like, here you go, and now you deal with it, and I'm kind of out of here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so now
Mm-hmm.
from the age of 16 to now, like that's really been the journey for me of trying to walk through so much of that abuse and that trauma, um, and really the consequences of her behaviors in my life. Um, but at the age of about, I think it was my late 20s, early 30s, I got connected to a home church through a friend of mine at school. I was teaching at the time, and so she invited me to a Friday night home church, and that's where I had already started some counseling by then, but it wasn't really doing much, Gary. It wasn't until I got to that home church that other women came alongside of me, and it was kind of just a little bit of kind of what my grandmother was like, that taste of Jesus in her. But now I got
Mm.
all of this other dose of it through all of these other women, meeting me where I was at in my pain and my suffering, and I could share just what all the sexual brokenness, the consequences of that in my life, and the sin that I entered in because of it.
Yes.
So that's really where God, you know, uh, met me, and He really began to do a deep work in me. And so that lasted quite a few years, spending time with them. And it was through them that I was connected to you and Melissa, and that's
Mm-hmm.
where I was able to really start talking about part of the shame that came along with all of the sexual abuse, because part of the sexual abuse was my mom actually sexually abusing me. And so there was a lot of shame around
Mm-hmm.
of how I was seeing women and how I was relating to women. And I didn't understand why I was feeling, certain things.
Right.
And so Melissa and you were able to really meet me in that place of deep despair, where all I wanted was really just to go to sleep and never wake up. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, yeah, no, thank you, Becky, for sharing your story. I know with the statistics that are out there that 1 in 4 girls by the time she reaches the age of 18 will have been sexually abused. And, at least once, if not, is in your case, many and multiple times. And that, there's some numbers out there that would say 1 in 6 boys will experience the same thing by the time that he reaches the age of 18. And so the reality is that sexual abuse has always been an issue. Sexual abuse of children has always been an issue, and it certainly is a dominant issue when you look at that as being around 25% of the female population, around 18-20% or so of boys, that 15 to 20% of boys or so are experiencing or will experience abuse. I mean, we need, as the church, we need as a Christian community to be sensitive to the reality that this has been a part of people's experience. And I believe that, I'd love for you to comment on this, but I believe that most men and most women who have experienced these issues in childhood are still dealing with the fallout and the trauma. Many of them probably never really having in any way dealt with it, or, I mean, like in a clinical sense with counseling and those kinds of things, most not dealing with it there, but even a good number that have been, kind of went for a period or season for counseling, maybe even really good counseling. There's so many layers of damage and destruction that's done through sexual abuse that it's kind of an unfolding process of healing and restoration. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I agree. Sexual abuse really strips the individual away from their identity, who they are, but it also
Yes.
strips you away from. In my case, it stripped away the God's intention for family. Like I didn't experience what it was to be protected by a father, to be loved by a mother. And so there's just so many different also aspects of what you lose when you are sexually abused. And so
Yes.
it's then there's this search of deeper healing. But somehow I think sometimes people are looking for a deeper healing for themselves, and of course that's absolutely necessary, and especially in a clinical setting with a counselor, absolutely necessary. But that work actually gets played out even more when you are in a community with others that can walk
Yes.
alongside of you. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely.
What would you say about well, let me back up just a moment. You mentioned in your testimony about sexual abuse and other forms of abuse, and you mentioned being trafficked. And with your mom, I know just from knowing you and hearing your story. And by the way, your long form story probably 40 to 45 minutes, just like mine and my wife Melissa and Jeremiah. We've done long form testimonies that are on our website for people that want to hear more. And for some, they need that longer story, and maybe they're not in a place where they can get a lot of support, maybe feel a little bit more secluded or whatever. And they're looking for people that have a story of God's redemption in their life that they can really connect with. So that's why we've done the longer form stories. We've also shortened them and edited them down for those that would rather, are more interested in kind of a 10-minute thing. But so your story is on our website and it goes into more detail. But the reality of being trafficked was part of that, or maybe the majority of it. You can comment on that.
Mm-hmm.
It came about as your mom was basically selling you for drug money or drugs or for rent money or that kind of thing to men. And is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, once I realized what it was, I thought, I mean, I was. Yeah, when someone, and I don't remember who it was, Gary, that put that language to what was happening, I was just like, wow. But yeah, she had such a hard time keeping a job, and so we would move into different places, and so she had a boyfriend who was a drug dealer, and so basically he was kind of the one that would give her drugs in exchange for allowing him to rape me, and to allow others to come in as well. And
That's
so,
so hard, Becky.
yeah. And in one of the homes that we were living at, it was attached to the main home, and so again, she didn't have a job, but the husband that lived in the main house, she knew how we were going to be able to stay there. So basically, he would come over and rape me, and sometimes she was involved in that as well. So it's just this just horrific just mess of just people trying to meet their needs in such broken ways, and I was in the midst of it, and so that just and my mom just kind of saw me as someone that I really didn't really necessarily feel like a human. It was more like something that she owned that she could hand out if it was necessary, or if it somehow it was to her benefit, right? Things were always to her benefit. But Gary, I try to be empathetic and compassionate thinking about my mom, and that's not excusing or minimizing what happened, but also trying to sometimes, as I've healed more, to try to kind of see a little bit into her brokenness. But it's just horrible stuff.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned also like living with your grandmother for a while, you and your sister, and but that, if I recall correctly, that was a reprieve, but it wasn't stable, in that your mom, when she would get back on her feet, she'd come back and get you again, and you're back to living in that same situation. And so there wasn't it was a place of safety, but it didn't last for very long each time, I don't think, did it?
No, you're absolutely right.
Okay.
She, again, it's like this. She had a job. She didn't have a job. We couldn't keep whatever house. I mean, we were homeless, most of the time. If it wasn't for grandma taking us in, I don't know where we would have been at, but
right.
We would come, and
absolutely,
when we were at grandma's house, we knew, my sister and I, we knew that we had a place to sleep. We knew we were going to have food to eat. And we knew that my grandma because grandma knew what was going on, but again,
Yeah.
in our family, a lot of secrecy, nobody's going to say anything. And so I felt seen and I felt cared for by my grandmother. But as soon as my mom was quote unquote back on her feet, she would come and she would just be, so angry at my grandmother, that telling her that she wanted to keep us, and that she wanted to like have, in a sense, ownership over us, right? But it's kind of
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, So anyway, there was always this
She's
huge
trying to
fight.
protect you.
Exactly. Yes, thank you. Um,
Yeah.
but basically, there was
Yeah.
always this huge fight, and then we were back out with my mom living in some of the worst places in the valley that just they were never safe, never safe.
Yeah. Well, and as life progressed for you, and I just think it's amazing that with all of this trauma that happened, you went on and you got your master's degree in teaching. It's at some point after that you actually went on and went to school for culinary arts. I don't know if what was the technical word for what you did there.
So I went to the Le Cordon Bleu, and I got a certificate as a pastry chef. So I did that as well.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And so what was it like? Were what was it like in the process of kind of deciding to go on and get a degree? Did that to college, was that something that might have been new for your family, for someone to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not, but was it kind of a scary thing, or were you excited and looking forward to some time, years in higher education?
Yeah, no, earlier when I mentioned that I had no idea who I was, that I was always looking to others to tell me. And in terms of education, that was my sister. So my sister's 2 years older than I am, and I looked up to her my whole life. And so I just followed whatever she did, and so she decided she was going to go to ASU after high school. She went into education. And so basically, like now looking back, I believe the Lord he had a hand on that. Like I really do believe that there was some giftings in me that he used powerfully in the education field. But I was just I had no idea about life. I had no idea what I'm doing, where I'm going. And so I'm just going to kind of follow, Norma, my sister, and see kind of where that takes me. And so in terms of, and so that was undergrad, and that was really challenging in college, just because that's when I was dealing a lot with my sexuality, and really just the consequences of everything that had happened as a child. Like all of this, body memories were happening, and I'm fearful, and I want to die, and so all of this is going on. But meanwhile, like somehow I was able to get through it. Somehow I was able
Yeah.
to just push through. And that's one of the biggest things I feel like the Lord has that's come out of so much trauma, is just this ability to lean into the hard things and just kind of keep going. Now there can be something unhealthy about that as well, right? But
Sure.
this is more about things that have actually led to the more that God had for me. So yeah, and the master's in education, that was one of the other lies that I have in my life, Gary, is that I'm stupid, right? And so somehow, if I have more education, if I have more education, if I have more education, somehow that lie is just kind of going to go away. And so here's my attempt to tell myself, well, no, you're not. But it never worked. So, yeah.
Well, and that is, I mean, there's so many bunny trails we could take off of what you've shared, and that I think are so important. And again, thank you so much for being willing to share your story with us and to dialogue about that for our podcast and other things as well, obviously. But one of the things that I think of there is what you're describing is an excellent example of how our past, when it's unhealed, it can motivate us to do all kinds of things that that now in this case, it's you going on and getting further education seems like a very good thing, and in many ways it is a good thing. But yet there's also an underlying a drive that sometimes that underlying drive in something like you're describing could be an underlying drive for perfection. It could be an underlying drive that like it's not good enough that I have good grades. I have to have excellent grades. And if I don't have excellent grades, I feel like I'm absolutely crushed. And what's driving that is that sense that, like you said, that feeling that I'm stupid and somehow I have to prove that I'm not, or maybe to myself, I need to prove that. And so if I'm not getting top grades all the time, if I'm not at a 4.0, then I feel like a failure, even though I'm doing so incredibly well. And I think the reason I bring this out is because for our listeners or those who are watching, there's obviously people in their lives, just like there's people in your life and my life, and things that we ourselves still deal with and struggle with that the Lord's bringing us through, that just that example alone can show how our past experiences, whether it's full-on trauma, whether it's experiences of rejection or labels that were hung around our neck by other people that we took on ourselves, like I'm stupid, or like I'm, for me, it was I'm unwanted and I'm unlovable. And there could be any number of gobs of examples of that in people's lives, but we tend to operate out of and live our lives out of that space of trying to overcome or trying to soothe those areas of brokenness or fill in the void. Like the emptiness is so painful that I have to just reach and grasp for something that's going to fill that. And so, I mean, yeah, can you speak to that maybe a little bit more about how our trauma or difficulties in our past experiences, when they're unhealed, they can either drive us toward obvious areas of brokenness and addiction, or they could drive us to things that we might get a lot of accolades and praise for, and yet the underlying motive could be something that's actually unhealthy.
Yeah. So, as I think about exactly what you're saying, Gary, I just think about I mean, I've been in therapy, and as I'm an intern as well, I go to Phoenix Seminary. I've been working with internal family systems model a little bit more, and just the idea that we have all of these what they would call as exiles, or these trauma parts of who we are, right? We have all these younger parts, some maybe not so young, but we have all of these parts within us that are holding in all of the trauma, that are holding in all of the emotion and the pain. And instead of dealing with that, which is very understandable why we wouldn't want to, right? But in choosing not to enter into that, then we develop all of these other protectors in a sense, right? And for me, you said earlier, is perfectionism. Like, I will try to do everything as perfect as I can so that I'm seen in a certain way, right? And I'm somehow wanted, and all of that to just kind of keep calm that other younger part of me that is hurting, and that needs to be seen and needs to share the impact of what happened to her. And so it could be perfectionism. It can be this internal critic, the one for me, you're stupid, what's wrong with you? It could be addictions like overeating or pornography, or some eating disorders also as well. So there can be different parts of us that are driving us to do what looks like on the outside good things, but at the end, they're actually preventing us from dealing with what we need to deal with internally to become integrated and whole and be able to live out of our true self, right? Who God has designed and created us to be. And so there's other parts like the people pleaser or being self-sufficient, like, I don't need your help, stay away from me. What the hell is wrong with you? Do you not think I can do it? So you have all of these other parts that, like you're saying, seem like they're doing something good. And at the end of the day, their intention is good because their intention is to actually keep you, what you would think as calm, but really they're just trying to mask what's trying to come to the surface. And so, when our internal system is off, then we have those addictions that kind of come in and put out the fire. And so we're numbing, we're zoning out, we're dissociating, all of that. And so, really, the way that we integrate the system is by actually dealing with the root causes of what's coming up for us. And that's done, yes, one-on-one with a counselor, but even more importantly, in a community with others that can walk alongside of you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love that point. The and I just want to share here too that somebody who has been sexually abused, and this isn't true just for those that have been sexually abused, but certainly one of the outcomes, it can be this wide swing. It can be a complete embrace of asexuality. Like, I want nothing. I don't feel anything sexual. I don't want to be with anybody. I never want to be with anybody. And that isn't, unfortunately, that's now being labeled as an identity. But that's not an identity. That's actually, if it stems from sexual abuse, then or other kinds of abuse, then that's actually something that the Lord would want to heal, would want to bring wholeness to. And so the response to trauma, abuse can be a wide range of detachment, shutting down, wanting nothing to do with that area of life ever. Or for some, it turns into promiscuity. For some, it actually becomes, it's like this unconscious repetition of trying to resolve the trauma from that happened, and trauma being abuse obviously is trauma always, or it could be a series of bad relationships that were, and that could be trauma too, but a series of bad relationships where a person just doesn't feel, a woman or a man, boy, just doesn't feel like they're worthy of love, that the people that they are drawn to and would love to love and have that reciprocated aren't interested in them. They're interested in people that look differently, look a certain way, act a certain way, whatever, have certain things. And so the wide range of how we can respond to brokenness in our past can definitely be in those areas of addiction, though. So I'm saying all this to say that it's important that the church understands, that Christian leaders understand, that so much of what feeds into sexual sin, pornography addiction, promiscuity, I think also, there's other things we could talk about with regard to same-sex attraction and things like that where there is some nuance around that's a little bit different, but there's so much that's similar in that arena too, to just what everybody else is dealing with. But how promiscuity, we need to understand, isn't just a choice to embrace sexual sin. Of course, there's a choice involved in it. I'm not minimizing that. There's sin involved in it. Absolutely not minimizing that. But the bigger question, and you've talked about this a couple of times, is the reality that we need to get underneath of the symptom. And don't ignore the symptom, but we need to get underneath the symptom, a number of layers down, probably levels down, to really address the ache and the emptiness and the past experiences and what the belief systems that we believed about ourselves, like I'm stupid, I'm unlovable, whatever, we believed about ourselves because of those bad experiences, and what we've come to believe about God, about his, he doesn't love me either, he's rejected me too, those things that we believe to be true that aren't true, and also our view of others. And so there's so much that plays into why we're acting out in sexually compulsive ways or compulsive, sinful ways that's so much deeper than just the actual circumstance or the behavior. And I think we as Christians really do ourselves and others a great disservice when we're not willing to go to those deeper levels with people.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Yep. Yeah, I completely agree.
one of the things I also wonder about with your getting your degree, your master's degree in teaching, and then moving into that space. I think you were teaching for 16 years or so,
Mhm.
and another thing that people listening to us, watching us, or people they may know, is the reality that we can function oftentimes pretty well in a public setting, even when there's great trauma going on. And I remember years and years ago, somebody talking about being a high functioning person at work and well loved and people just assuming they had it all together, and they would literally could not wait to get out of the car and into their house, and they would shut the door and they would put their back against the door and they would just slide down the door into a heap and just sob every day because it took everything they had just to get through the day to keep up that image.
Mhm.
And so I wonder, obviously all of this stuff is in your life while you're teaching. There was so much of it that was yet unhealed and unaddressed. Wouldn't even know necessarily, what do I do with this? I mean, the only thing that many of us do know is, well, you just kind of move on. So you just sort of stuff it, put the lid on it as best you can, and just move on with life. But ultimately it leaks out, all over the place at some point, the longer that we do that.
Mhm.
And so what do you think that people kind of had that same experience with you in this professional setting, where they just assumed, oh, Becky is just got it all together and has no issues? And I mean, what are your thoughts about that perception people might have had?
Yeah, yeah. So like women in our family, Gary, it's all really about appearance, right? The way that on the outside that you look. And so I grew up and I learned very quickly what it was like and what I needed to do to look quote unquote perfect on the outside. And so I'm
Mm,
teaching, I mean, from the outside, and people would tell me, "You look so put together. You look so put together." And internally, I'm thinking, if you only knew the mess that's inside of me, right? But
mm,
I knew how to keep up. In a sense, like Living Waters calls it the false self. Like I knew how to keep that up, and that and I was functioning as best I could at work, but all my energy, just like you described with this other individual, all my energy went into presenting in that way, day after day, day after day. And
mm-hmm.
and I went far and beyond also in the teaching field. Like I was a workaholic as well. So I'm there at 6, wouldn't leave till 7 o'clock in the evening, go home and only have like a few hours to eat dinner, and then go to bed to do it all over again the next day. And so that was
Mm,
just another way to keep from feeling what was coming up. So yeah, it was draining, it was exhausting, and if there was a day where I didn't want to present in that way, like it wasn't a choice. And so there's this internal part of me that's just like, no, you don't have a choice. You have to do that because that's the way you're presenting, and what are other people going to think about you, right? So when we talk about
mm,
shame, it's like, what is wrong with me? And so the shame was just so heavy that it's like I can't let people
yep.
know that there's something like there's something wrong with me. And so I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that people don't find out. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so it's very very draining, and at the same time, um, that same presentation was driven or was fueled more by others saying to me, "Oh, you look like you're all put together," right? Or the principal giving me a
Yes.
review saying, "You are doing an amazing job. I can't find not one thing that I can give you feedback on or constructive feedback on. And so
Mm-hmm.
that again kind of would fuel that part of me that wanted to be seen and loved, and so it was just enough to then keep with all the false, self,
Yeah.
right? And so it's this ongoing kind of cycle of just getting a little bit of a trickle of what I would say, or what I was looking for in terms of love or being seen, just to keep that part of me just pushing, 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 and yet I have this other, part of me, like, when's the day that we're going to die? Like, how can we get in the car and run into that wall and total our car, and enough for the airbag to come out, deploy, and this, piece of glass to come. I mean, it was like I have all of these,
Yeah.
two parts internally going on.
Mm-hmm. Well, and when as you're talking, the thing that strikes me is, I mean, how difficult under that kind of pressure must it have been to even, like, you can't even have a bad day.
Mhm.
I mean, and invariably, of course, we all have bad days, and there's times that you just can't even cover that up. I understand, but the drive to, even when you're exhausted, even when you feel like you've hit the bottom and you can't face another day, being under that drive of perfection and that drive of image management and that drive to gain appreciation and value by always being on and performing at your peak, then the drive then to not allow there to be a bad day. I mean,
Mhm.
you can't even give yourself a break for a day, right? I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I exactly. And because of that, obviously, we know that that's not realistic and it's not manageable, and our bodies can't actually handle that. And
Yeah.
so, I remember that it was, I would work through the summer, so I wouldn't even take the summers off. And then I start up the
Mm,
school year once again in September. And it was like late September or so that I like my body would just completely shut down. And so I'm crying, I'm depressed, I'm suicidal. I'm, being admitted into the hospital. What's wrong? Like, what's wrong with her? And what does she need? What do we, And so there was this pattern, ongoing pattern, year after year, where my body just had to give out in order for me to give myself
mm,
permission to rest, right? Even though that wasn't really
yeah.
rest, but my body actually had to take me to a place where it just could not do it any longer. And I would crash, and I would be out for like 2 weeks without being able to function. But then
Hmm.
I was back. I was back in the classroom, and I was back in that same pattern. And it was I mean, just year after year after year after year, just doing the same thing over and over
Yeah.
again. Yeah.
Well, and it strikes me too that for those who deal with perfectionism or kind of earning the right to be loved or acknowledged or seen or any of that, the again is a response to the what we did not get that God designed for every child to need in legitimate ways, that pouring in that affirmation, that love and affection, and a sense of being delightful and desired and cared for, all those things. But I guess uh, for someone in that situation, the one, you don't want to break down in any area, but if you're going to break down in some area, let it be the body.
Mhm.
I mean, let it be something that you can at least say, oh, that's a physical thing.
Mhm.
Like, it's not about it's not about my emotional state. God forbid anybody think there's an issue there, right? So the body, and you're right in saying eventually the body tells on us. Eventually, the body does break down, and it really is not. It's not healthy, but it's kind of this last ditch effort.
Mhm.
It's the eject button in a sense for your body to say, "Look, you have got to stop." And so the body gives out, but then it's something we can point to, and others can maybe assume, oh, there's something going on with them physically, but it's still a cover for what's going on with us emotionally or spiritually
Mhm.
or internally.
Yeah. 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 And the hard part when I would go to the hospital though is they can never find anything physically wrong with me, right? And so at the end of
Mm-hmm.
going, it was like, well, there's nothing wrong with you. And so that was
Mm-hmm.
just a hard piece, Gary, because exactly what you're saying. If they would have given me some kind of physical diagnosis, then I can kind of go to people and be like, oh yeah, well, it's whatever it is, right? But
Yep.
instead, I would leave with this. There's nothing really other than you're making this up, is really the message that I got.
Mm.
So I think also for maybe listeners that have had that experience where their bodies are either there's a book, Why the Body Keeps the Score, that whether your body's kind of actually
Mm-hmm.
telling you like there's something going on, and you're going to doctor's visits, and you're getting well, there's nothing wrong with you, right? And then you end up with this this negative belief or cognition that somehow, you're lying, that what you're saying is not true, what you're feeling is not true, and that you're just kind of making it up. Like that's one huge thing out there, I think, in mental health, to really be cautious, to know that when we are dealing with emotional stuff, like that gets worked out in our bodies, and that there is something going on. Like it's not just a
Mm-hmm.
make believe thing. It's not just like it's true. Like it really is the way that our bodies are trying to work out and express just all of the trauma from childhood, whether it's big traumas or little traumas that have accumulated into big traumas, right? So so I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yeah.
that kind of came out of nowhere, but I feel like that's very, very common too, and with mental
Yeah.
health stuff. Yeah.
No, absolutely. There's, and even in the church, I feel like the church is moving in a positive direction with regard to mental health. I think there's a long way to go, but I know that there are some churches that are now addressing that issue in a very intentional kind of way, and not. I think we make a huge mistake. And as someone who grew up in the church myself, got off into the weeds and rebellion for years and all that, but as someone who grew up in the church, everything was really all like sin issues and struggles or those kinds of things that were always considered just spiritual issues purely.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, you're saying yes to Satan, or you're saying yes to your flesh, and you just need to say yes to God, say yes to the new man in Christ or the new woman in Christ, if we're a woman, and it's going to be all better. And there is a role, obviously, a huge role of obedience, clearly in Scripture, but the idea that it's only a spiritual issue, that there's not so many other things. I mean, we're spirit, soul, and body. And the reality that those interplay and are interwoven in ways that cannot be separated. Our spiritual issues and struggles are not just spiritual. They are that. They aren't just sin areas. They are that. But there's so much more going on than that. One of the things that you also brought up was your tendency, not just tendency, but really the active way you were a workaholic. And, I think that so many people who are have experienced childhood trauma or even, chronic neglect is oftentimes not looked at as a childhood trauma. It wasn't something that was done to somebody. It was all the things that they should have gotten that were withheld from them, essentially. And so in many ways, it's very difficult to even put your finger around like what was wrong with that. There wasn't abuse or maybe there were times of that, but more than anything, it was that sense of just being on my own and not being loved or cherished or that important. Maybe I had food to eat, clothes on my back, a roof over my head, but that was the extent of the quote unquote love that was shown. And so whatever the issue is, whether people are trying to outrun that sense of not being loved or lovable because of the neglect, whether it was the outright trauma of sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional, verbal, other things, rejection, whatever. But so often workaholism winds up being a way in which people, quote unquote, manage, not well, but manage the pain that they're still carrying. And I think it's interesting. I wanted to bring this up for people that are listening or watching, that it in many ways it's very understandable that somebody who is a workaholic will actually really can respond in a very angry kind of way when that's pointed out to them, or maybe their wife or their husband or their another loved one is talking about the hours they're putting in, and the demonstration of workaholism that they're exhibiting, because for them they may not even see that as really being a big deal or an issue, but it's been the way that they've been able to stay ahead of or on top of these emotions or the pain or the emptiness that they've been trying to outrun for years or decades sometimes. I mean, what are your thoughts about the way workaholics can be blinded to the need they have to actually slow down, but more than just slow down, get with some counselors, get with some other brothers or sisters in Christ who can be made aware of this challenge and really walk with them in this season of learning to get healed up from the things that are driving the workaholism?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would definitely consider, as we were kind of talking about different ways we quote unquote protect ourselves, workaholism is one of those, right? As you explained, Gary,
Yeah.
it's a way of numbing. It's a way of checking out, and in a way kind of disassociating from the reality of what's going on internally, right? How can I, in a sense, separate myself from my body, so that I'm not feeling what actually is coming up, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's having a willingness that when people around us that love us and are saying, hey, like, here's something that I'm noticing and I'm just wondering, right? Just being curious
Mm-hmm.
about why we do what we do. Um, I mean, we've already had plenty of negativity, plenty of kind of just being um, uh, maybe just being critical about who we are and why we don't get this done
Mm-hmm.
or that done, right? But we've had plenty of that. And you think about, okay, well, I've tried to deal with it this way. And I know you and Melissa, asked this question a lot. How's that working out for you? Right. And you say, well, it's
Mm-hmm.
not. Right. And so how can we kind of shift that in a way of looking at why I'm choosing to spend hours and days and most of my life working, right? Why am I doing that? And there's actually people on the outside kind of being curious with me about, is this really helpful, right? To live the life that God intended for that individual to live, right? And so for
Mm-hmm.
me, it was having a willingness to kind of lean in a little bit into what was coming up for me, which meant I needed to slow down just enough to start feeling like, yeah, there's stuff there, and now others actually coming alongside of me where I don't feel that I am alone in this battle, but yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say that it was easy, Gary. I mean, I was in the teaching field 16
Mm-hmm.
years, and so
Yep.
it would, yeah, that workaholism was really, in a sense, it seemed like I had control over things, right? Like somehow the workaholism was giving me control, and yet really it had control over me, and I wasn't headed in the right direction at all. So again, it was kind
Yeah.
of that willingness on my part to kind of step outside of that and and start really looking internally. And really, as I shared earlier, my body just kind of started shutting down. So in a way, like there there really is no other choice, right? Than to actually have to stop. But getting to that point is it's not helpful. It's not healthy. Um, and so that's one thing with my story. There's a lot of parts of it and I'm very shameful of, and but I just, I don't know how I would want to be able just to tell individuals out there in the audience that have deep, deep trauma that doing the work, Gary, like doing the work is actually where the freedom comes in, and that it's scary and that it's hard. It's so hard. But it is so worth doing the hard work, not alone, but with others, right? And so, I mean, that's the message really that that I have for others, is that, entering into the work. I wish, Gary, that I would have, and I'm thankful to the Lord for what He's done at this timing. His timing is perfect, but that He would have gotten, that I would have been more willing much earlier on in my life, and how my life, the trajectory of my life would have been shifted in such a way that that things that I struggled, later in life potentially might have not been there at all, right? And so I work with teens, and I, quite frankly, going into the counseling field, the last population I wanted to work with were teens, right? And yet, when there's teens coming in with trauma, the Lord's just kind of like, Becky, like, the trajectory of their lives can change, right? When you help them be able to deal with the underlying things, but also be able to bring me into this place of healing for them. I mean, it's just like, to me, it's amazing to be able to think about people that young, right? To have a shift in life. But the other piece to that is that they have parents, and the parents also have to be on board with helping the teen. And I totally got off on a tangent, but
No. I love that. I love that. There's something you said a little bit earlier. I think all of that has value. Something you said a little bit earlier, and I thought, oh, this is a great way to wrap up this week's podcast. And there's a lot more I want to talk with you about, and we can do that next week. But you talked about the theme, or the idea of needing to slow down. And so I thought that is, I'd love to take that into kind of launching and starting off the next week's podcast. But before we wrap up this one, as we were talking about workaholism, I think it's important to point out as well that there are so many ways that we can respond to the pain, the emptiness, whatever, inside of us, the trauma from childhood or whatever. We can respond in ways that are addictive in terms of negative kinds of behaviors, or commonly understood, whether that's a pornography addiction, or it's some other sexual addiction, or an eating disorder or issue, or a number. But my point is that there are those things that we can get involved in that we don't want anyone to know about, and there are areas that we feel ashamed about. We're fearful of others knowing about. That is oftentimes what's thought of as addiction. But the reality is, there's also those addictions, those ways of coping, and we're talking about workaholism. You mentioned perfectionism. So those things are actually things we want to keep dusted and shiny and put up on our mantle for everyone to see, because a workaholic is not, most bosses, unless they're a really good boss and they recognize the need for holistic care of the whole person, they're not coming and saying, hey, Bob or Jenny or Becky or whatever, you've been putting in a lot of hours this week or last week. We're in a busy season. I know that right now, but man, when this season's over, I want you to take some extra time. I mean, I want you to make sure that you're taking care of yourself and your family. Well, that almost never happens. What tends to happen is we're just constantly in go mode. And again, trying to mitigate whatever the stuff is inside of us that's never been dealt with, or ever healing has ever brought to. The same thing would be true again of perfectionism. So there's many things that we would, in one sense, like to get rid of, But those things we want to get rid of, the porn or whatever the case is, those things they're still meeting a need. They're still somehow filling in the gap. That's why we keep going back to them. They're ultimately leading to destruction, but in the moment they meet a need of some kind, but we don't want people to know about them. But when it comes to perfectionism and workaholism, there's an idol there that, in addition to the broken way of working out our pain or emptiness, there's an idol there, and many people really feel strongly about defending that idol because it's like, you want me to give this up? Like, this is where all of my affirmation's coming from. I mean, and they may not verbalize it that way, but it's more of an internal gut reaction or sense. And so I think it's important that we recognize not all addictions are the negative things we don't want anybody to know about. Some of them are those things that drive us. And in a sense, they have even more power because they positively reinforce us, and give us a good sense, a good feeling about ourselves. Any last thoughts on that before we wrap up this particular podcast?
No, I mean, I agree, Gary, that in some ways there's parts of us that are driving our lives that look good on the outside, right? And you mentioned that earlier, that it's acceptable, that, working late hours, benefiting, whether it's the school system, the business, whatever it is, it's on the outside, it seems good, right? But at the end of the day, when you really step back and look, is it really leading the person to a place of being whole enough, right? And so it's just really, just kind of stepping back and seeing how is whatever it is, perfectionism or workaholism, how is that working out for the individual in their life, and not just for them, right, but for others that are around them. And if there isn't others around them, then that's an indication as well. So no, I mean, that's really all I have.
And I think even things like keeping up with the Joneses, in a sense, having the manicured perfect house, everything's impeccable when you come into the home, and it's almost like people don't even live here. This is more like a model house that it doesn't even, it takes so much work to be able to actually invite somebody over into a home where you feel comfortable having them, that it's exhausting, first of all, to even do an event or have people over. And then it also models it models for everybody else coming this sense that this is what your house has to look like if you're going to be doing this too. And so it perpetuates this, really, in one sense, there's an admiration or this sense of, oh my gosh, this is gorgeous, this is beautiful. But yet it in many ways, it's a bit fake. It's not the way people live their everyday lives. And yeah, I'm not saying we shouldn't pick up or, clean or whatever when we have people over, but I think we can just go overboard, and that going overboard tends to connect with a lot of the brokenness. I think of somebody else that both you and I have known that's addicted to shopping and addicted to buying clothes and things that they can wear that they look beautiful in, they look wonderful in, but it's something that is driven by, when you really spend time kind of talking about it, it's something that's driven by the very things we're talking about, that those unhealed areas of woundedness and that I need to present on the outside in a way that draws attention and draws a sense of that they're beautiful and there's nothing wrong with wanting to look good, but we can be so driven by that brokenness on the inside that it becomes compulsive to have a new outfit all the time, for everything to look perfect. And so again, we just want to say, yes, our ministry, Love and Truth Network, is about restoring relational and sexual wholeness, and the church becoming equipped to really deal with those issues within the church. But the truth is, there's so many ways that we tend to compensate and to try to resolve the pain and the emptiness that we're experiencing, it's a plethora of issues. It's not usually just connected to relationships or sexuality, but those are big pieces. So anyway, I just want to kind of wrap up our time together. And Becky, I so appreciate you being with us today. I hope that you who have been tuned in to us, friends that are listening to us or watching us, have benefited from the conversation with Becky, that maybe there's something that she's shared or I've shared that resonates with you personally. Hopefully that would be true. We would love for that to be true. But also maybe there are people in your life that would connect with what we're talking about. We'll connect them to this podcast. Also, if you have pastors or Christian leaders in your life that you've not talked to about our ministry, we would love to have a conversation with them. We'd love for you to introduce us to them. And if we can be a resource or a help or support to your church, to your Christian leaders, in equipping them, walking with them in ways that in this culture, in this day, are so vital in these areas of restoring relational and sexual wholeness, we would love to do that. That's the reason we exist. So bless you. Have a wonderful day. And we'll see you in a podcast next week, where we'll be joined with Becky once again. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us for this Love and Truth Network podcast. To listen to or watch future episodes, please check us out at loveandtruithnetwork.com/podcast. Also, you can subscribe to Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Google Podcast, and we look forward to seeing you in a future episode.